Hey, how's everybody doing? Everybody doing all right today? Hey, how's everybody doing? Everybody doing? Oops, sorry, I had my microphone set on. It's good to see everybody. Do y'all have any questions before we get started with the lecture today? Anybody got any questions? I figured I'd start it a couple minutes early. Alex, Ashley, Amber. Looks like Ken Hoyle is going to be here today. He actually is currently in Microsoft Teams. He came to the wrong room, but he'll be joining us in just a second. Anybody have any questions before we get started? Remember, you can type your questions in the chat bar and it will pop up for all of us to see. Or you can send me a text on my phone using Remind, and I'll be more than happy to respond either way to your questions or concerns today. Remember, at the end of this lecture, this video will be available as a recording. You should come back and look at it as many times as you need. And remember, the PowerPoint presentation that goes with this video is also attached at the very bottom of this screen. Let's see, do we have any questions? I've got top chat. Chat, I don't know why it resets on me. So let's see, any more questions? Nope, doesn't look like we have any questions. All right, well, you know what? Hello, will this lecture help us with some of the questions in the homework? Because I left some blank. Absolutely, Ashley, that is the point. You actually don't have to do the homework until you see all 4 lectures. So you should be able to complete your homework after having watched today's video. Hi, Evarikia, it's good to see you. Any other questions? It's good to see you, Needy. Is it Needy or Nighty? Give me the long I or the short I to let me know how to pronounce your name correctly. It's good to see everybody. So this week we're going to be talking about research. Today we're going to be talking about research methods in psychology. Good morning, Kyle. Ken, good to see you. Glad to see you're in the right room. You'll figure the pattern out. Don't worry about it. Remember, Monday through Thursday it's on YouTube. Friday it's going to be in Microsoft Teams. I got Madison Grigaitis here on Remind, also checking in and saying hello. It's good to see you too. Wow, 12 people. Well, let's go ahead and finish chapter 1. No, I do not recommend the Inquisitive from the textbook, Ken. Somebody asked a question about it yesterday in one of the orientations regarding what I would call alignment. I made up all of the questions on the exam based on my lectures and the PowerPoints and everything, and sometimes they're not going to line up as well with Inquisitive is my practice questions. So you'll probably just want to focus on what I'm doing as opposed to the textbook stuff. Okay, so science is a process. Remember, psychology is a science, and science is a process. So it's all in how we gather measurements, and that's what creates psychology as a science and differentiates it from philosophy. Psychologists use 3 broad approaches to gathering scientific information. We're going to talk about them today. And these 3 methods are descriptive methods, correlational methods, and experiments. So hopefully at the end of today's lecture, you'll have an appreciation for how we gather information in the science of psychology. In the science of psychology. And as we go through the semester, I'm going to refer back to this particular chapter as we introduce different findings in different topics in psychology. I think that's what he said. Yes, Needy, very good question. We have a Friday Teams webinar, and that will be more interactive than the lecture here. So today is primarily a lecture, one-way transmission of information, but I'm going to give you a chance to interact with each other on Friday, okay? Thank you for stepping in, John. I appreciate it. It's good to see you too. Wow, 12 people. Great audience today. Let's see. So I just want to point out that we're going to be talking about experiments and random assignment. Sometimes, especially in the allotted time that I have, I'm going to have to be pretty quick. You may not feel like you have a complete grasp of experiments or random assignment at the end of this lecture. I highly recommend you go to the course resources folder and watch the videos in there over and over again until you understand exactly what an experiment is and why random assignment is so important for an experiment. Okay, having said that, let's go ahead and get started on the next topic. Okay, so science is a process, and psychology follows this process just like other scientists too. So if you look in your textbook, I forget exactly what table it is, but it's going to talk about the 5 steps in the scientific process. And really, this is just the way in which we systematically approach the gathering of knowledge. And the idea of being systematic and being rational about our knowledge gathering is this allows us to gather knowledge which is most likely true. And that's really what we want. So, psychology, like other sciences, builds upon theories. And theories are simply descriptions of why observed phenomena occur. Why does my phone drop when I let it go? Well, because gravity says that bigger objects pull smaller objects towards them. That's a theory, an explanation for why an observation occurs. Psychology does the same thing. It uses theories to explain why people are functioning. And these theories tie elements together that help us to understand how the world works. So you might have the theory high self-esteem leads to success because it protects us from the negative impact of occasional failure. So we might ask the question, how does self-esteem, how does feeling good about yourself affect your level of success? I might create a theory which says, well, feeling good about yourself buffers you from the inevitable failure. That's an explanation for why self-esteem and success are related. Now, what we do in psychology is we follow this 5-step process. Let me see, Erica's saying she can't make it. Okay, so there are 5 steps in the scientific process. The first is that you formulate a theory by consulting the existing literature. There's a huge body of literature which tells us what we already know about the human being or any body of knowledge. And what you have to do is before you can start testing things, you have to be aware of what is already known, either because you agree with it or because you're setting out to disprove this particular theory. Now, we then use this theory to develop concrete observable tests or hypotheses where we expect these theories to be borne out. Some of you have probably heard of hypotheses as educated guesses. Do you know why they're called educated guesses? Because they're educated by a theory. A hypothesis says, if theory A works, then we should see this in the real world. So a hypothesis is a specific test of a more general theory. We then use a research method to gather data which allows us to test that hypothesis. The focus of this class really is going to be on number 3 because we're going to talk about the 3 different research methods used in psychology. And so what we do here is we gather data to allow us to evaluate our hypothesis. Did our data turn out as we expected? If not, then we might have to rethink our theory. If our data turned out as we expected, then we feel more confident in our theory. We analyze these data, and then the most important part is sharing the results, because what we need to do is we need to grow the body of knowledge. Every time we learn a little bit more about how humans function, it allows the people who are making new hypotheses to be aware of what is known about how humans function. Things to keep in mind. A theory is only good if you can prove it false. If you can't prove it false, then I don't care if you think it's true. You have to be able to show me how it succeeds in not being proved false, okay? Remember, theories are always temporary. They can be changed or discarded based upon new data. The whole point of science and what makes it different from other forms of endeavor is that in science we know that knowledge is temporary and further observations may cause us to have to rethink what we know. And it's also important, like I said, sharing your results so that everybody else knows what's going on is a very important part of the research process. If you'll look in your course resources folder, there's a short 5-minute video that goes through the steps in the research process that I think is very interesting. All right, now there are 3 ways in which we gather data to help test our hypotheses. We may use descriptive methods where we simply observe things, and this is used a lot of times in preliminary research settings or when we find unique people that we don't see anywhere else in the world. There are correlational methods where we try to tie relationships together. Does X affect Y? How are X and Y related? So as I suggested to you earlier, self-esteem might help you become more successful because it bolsters you from the inevitable failures. So what we're suggesting is that self-esteem is correlated with success. That would be a correlational method. And then the final way in which we gather data in psychology is the most difficult to set up, but the easiest way to demonstrate that our theory is most likely true, and that's the experimental methods. And so I'm going to talk about each 3 of these methods in order. Give me about 2 to 5 minutes on each of these methods, and hopefully at the end we'll have an appreciation for how psychologists gather information. Okay, so descriptive methods. You know what? A lot of times in research we go out and we don't know much about the phenomenon of interest. So what we might do is simply go out and observe people in their natural settings or in laboratory settings to see how they act. Observational studies involve observing and classifying behavior, either, like I said, with intervention by the observer, that is either where the participant knows you're there, or sometimes we do research where the participant doesn't even know they're being observed. Later in chapter 4, we're going to talk about attachment styles in early childhood, and we're going to talk about Mary Ainsworth's strange situation paradigm. She wanted to see if children had different relationships, if you could classify the relationships that infants had with their mothers. And what she found was that children tended to respond 3 different ways to being separated from their primary caregiver. And so she used a descriptive study to see that there were these 3 broad ways in which children responded to being separated from their primary caregiver. And so this would be what we might call an observational study. You're just observing and just measuring and trying to quantify or characterize the behavior that you're looking at. Now, the disadvantage to this is a great approach, especially in the early stages of research or when you really want to be open-minded to develop your theories. The only disadvantage of this is it's limited on your observational powers, and you have to be careful that you don't have expectations which influence how you perceive the participant's behavior. Also, in some settings, especially when the participant knows you're there, they may respond differently than they normally would. So sometimes the act of observing itself can cause the participants to change, and then you're not getting a true measure of how the participant behaves. So that's one kind of descriptive method. Now, a second kind of descriptive method are surveys and self-reports. A lot of you suggested that you're interested in the in the personality psych perspective. And these are the people that make tests to measure human qualities. Self-esteem tests, IQ tests, personality tests. Psychologists are famous for making up surveys and other self-report measures. A personality test, an IQ test, a self-esteem test are all self-reports where I ask you to tell me about yourself, all right? So self-reports are a descriptive method that involve asking questions of the research participants. Now, the neat thing about these self-reports is, it's usually a direct question and you get a direct answer from your respondents. So it's a really direct form of gathering information instead of watching children interact with their primary caregiver. I can ask them to tell me about their relationship with their primary caregiver. And really, instead of trying to guess what it's like, I can just ask them what their relationship is like. So self-reports are a little more direct way of gathering information. The only disadvantage with self-reports is a lot of times participants may have motivations not to be truthful, or they may not really know how they would behave in a given situation. So personality tests usually give you 50, 60, maybe 100 situations and ask you how you would behave in these given situations to come up with a measure of what your personality is. Well, you know what? Maybe you don't know how you would act at a large dinner party. Maybe you don't want to talk about how you would act at a large dinner party. So the problem with self-reports is that participants may not know how they feel, or more importantly, sometimes they may not want to tell us the truth. When we get to chapter 14 and talk about personality disorders, I'm going to have you take a personality disorder test, and we'll talk about why people might want to lie to keep anybody from knowing that they have a personality disorder. Okay, so that's the second type of descriptive method. Now there's a third type of descriptive method, and you're going to see this a lot in psychology this semester, and this is called the case study. Now, psychologists also learn by finding people who are unique, who have qualities or situations that cannot be replicated normally. And we look at these unique cases, and they oftentimes offer clues as to how the brain might work. So when we talk next week about biopsychology, the first person I'm going to do is introduce you to a fellow named Phineas Gage, who had a railroad accident in the 1900s where he had the front part of his brain blown out in an explosion. It didn't kill him. In fact, he was rather normal, with one exception. His personality completely changed. And so this one case study taught us an awful lot about where in the brain personality is controlled. Next week's discussion board is going to be about Clive Waring, who is actually a case study of memory loss, and you're going to find out what happened to Clive's brain and what kind of memories he has difficulties with. And this case study really is going to demonstrate a very important principle about a certain part of the brain. So case studies are very, very useful because a lot of times they're in situations where we couldn't manipulate or we couldn't create artificially without being unethical. Now, the disadvantage is that individuals are in fact individual, and it's difficult to generalize to a population based upon the results that you have with one person. So there are advantages of using case study methods, and there are also disadvantages of case study methods. But these case studies, self-reports, and observational studies are all descriptive ways of looking at people, asking people about themselves, or finding unique people and gathering data on them. And all three of these descriptive methods allow us to characterize, classify, and make guesses about how psychological processes work. Now, that's one broad category of data gathering. The second broad category that I'm going to talk about this morning is correlational methods. Now, you know what? You might find out that there are three basic ways that infants respond to separations from their mother. So what? A more important question you might want to ask is what happens to children later in life based upon these attachment styles. So what you're asking now is a question of correlation. is there a relationship between an early interaction style and a later life outcome? And so you would be using what's known as a correlational model. Now, there are different attachment styles, and one attachment style is what's called the anxious ambivalent or the clingy personality style, right? And so some people might ask the question, are children who are clingy more introverted as adults? And the answer would be yes. The more likely you are to be clingy when your mom leaves, the more likely you are to be introverted later in life. So this is a relationship between two variables, and you would uncover this with a correlational study. Now, this is an advantage. The advantage of this is you can look at naturally occurring relationships, right? So I couldn't take children and separate them from their moms on purpose, could I? But I could, or make their relationship with their mom or primary caregiver bad, but I can look at these relationships when they occur and see if they relate to later outcomes. And so this is the advantage of the correlational model. Now, the disadvantage of the correlational model is I don't know if one thing necessarily causes another. So do clingy children become more introverted, right? That says clinginess causes introversion. Or would you say that people who are born introverted tend to be more clingy to their mom? So is it A causing B, or is it B causing A, right? So there, with the disadvantage of a correlational study is it's hard to say what causes what. You can only do that if you're using what's known as the true experiment. Okay, so the true experiment. Oh my goodness, I hope I haven't missed anybody's chat so far. Has everybody, anybody have questions so far? Anybody have questions? I'm going to give you just a minute. Sometimes I run on at the mouth just a little too quickly. I don't think we're going to have any questions. If you do, I will stop and catch up with them. All right, let's talk about the third broad way of gathering information, a way of gathering data. And this is called the true experiment. And I'll bet all of you have probably been in other science classes where they talk about how to do an experiment. And you know what? We're going to talk about how to do one today. So an experimental method is different from the other two is because it's the only research method that really allows us to demonstrate causality. Okay? It allows us to really show that A maybe causes B. And now, the only difficulty is it's hard to set up experiments. They require a certain degree of experimental control that makes it difficult for them to set them up in certain situations. All right? So what I'd like to do is to take a couple of minutes and explain exactly how an experiment works. And the key to an experiment is this thing called random assignment. So I take a group of people and I randomly assign them into 2 groups or 3 groups or 4 groups or however many groups that I want to divide them into. Now I have to do it randomly so that my groups of people are similar. I'm going to describe what random assignment is by giving you an example of what non-random assignment is, right? So what if I divided you into males and females, right? And then males. And so we might find that these 2 groups are different at time 1. So that's what we would call a non-random way to divide this group up. Here's a random way to divide my group, to divide your class. I could close my eyes and go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and randomly point at people and divide you into 2 groups. If I did that and measured your heights, chances are we'd have tall people in one group and tall people in the other group, short people in one group and short people in the other group. So in a sense, we would have 2 groups that were generally similar at time 1. in order to set up an experiment, you really have to randomly assign your students into groups this way. Now, after we get these two groups, I then put you through a situation that is exactly the same with the exception of one difference. Let me give you an example. I wanted to test whether or not the use of videos in an online class would make the students get to know and like the teacher more. So last semester, I had two online sections of Psychology 150. In one of those classes, I did my announcements and my discussion boards in text. I just typed them out. And in the other class, I did my announcements and discussion board prompts using a video, right? Now, they had the same exact tests. They had the same exact writing assignments. They had the same homework assignments. Everything was similar in both of these classes, with the exception of how I transmitted course information. I either did it in video or I did it in text, right? Now, I then measured how much they felt like they knew me and the other class members. And what I found was that those students who were in my class with the videos and the video announcements and video discussion boards felt like they knew me better, and weirdly enough, felt like they knew all of the other students better. So I compared them to the class that only got the announcements and the discussion boards in text format, and it turns out they didn't feel like they knew me as well, and they didn't feel like they knew the other class members as well. So the class was the same, the assignments were the same, the words were the same. The only difference between these two classes, the only difference was that one class got videos and one class got text announcements. Now, since these two groups of people are most likely the same, what is responsible for their change in feelings about me and the other students? Somebody, can you please, if you're still here with me, somebody type in the answer to that. And I'll give you just a minute. Now, there was a problem with my study, and I'll tell you about it in just a second. Okay. Well, I'm hoping somebody's going to type in that since the classes were completely the same, the difference in the students' perception was due to whether or not they received videos or text. Yes, absolutely, Grace. Very good answer. It was the use of videos. And so that allowed me, in a sense, to conclude that the use of videos helps personalize the instructor. And so that would be, in a sense, an experiment. Now, here's the problem. It was not a true experiment. And here's the deal. I was not allowed to randomly assign students to which section they took. You know, when you registered for this class, you picked my class. You didn't have to pick my class, but you picked my class. Last semester, I was not allowed to put students in one section or the other. And I don't know if you know this, but it turns out that students, when they select classes, as a general rule, pick the classes at the top before they pick the classes at the bottom. So if you're looking for one of my classes in the fall, and I have 6 sections of Online 150, they will generally fill from top to bottom. And you know what? It turns out the students who pick a class first tend to be a little more motivated and a little more on top of things than students who pick classes last. So really, the classes with the higher numbers tend to have less motivated students. Now, in my particular experiment, I gave the class with the lower number the videos, that is the class higher in the registration, I gave them the videos, and then the class right below them, I gave the text. So I really can't truly say that it was the videos that made the students more engaged, because I didn't randomly assign the students to which section they were taking. Does that make sense? Sometimes when I'm lecturing to a video screen, it's hard to explain, to get feedback and see if I'm doing a good job or a bad job, right? So if this didn't come through clear, that's fine, no big deal. There are 3 short videos to supplement this lecture. One is on the 6 steps in the research process. Go ahead and watch that short video and it'll pretty much echo the first part of my lecture. Then there's a video on how to do experiments, and there's a video explaining exactly what random assignment is and how it relates to our ability to demonstrate cause. All right, this is the end of the Thursday lecture, or the 1B lecture, repeating the over demonstrate a possible. Wow, great point. Kyle brings up the question, repeating the study over multiple semesters could demonstrate a possible trend line. Wow, Ken, you should be a scientist. That is a great point to make. There are some things we'd like to study experimentally, but we can't study experimentally. So are you telling me if we can't do an experiment, we can never demonstrate cause? Well, you know what? We can't do a true experiment to demonstrate that smoking causes cancer in humans. Because in order to do that, I would have to randomly assign people to smoke cigarettes, right? So imagine me going into a 3rd grade class, randomly assigning half of these kids to smoke a pack of cigarettes every day for the rest of their life, and then comparing them with the kids who don't smoke to see who gets cancer first. You can't do that. However, if you look at correlations between people's smoking behavior and their likelihood of getting cancer, and we see this correlation time after time after time, then what we do is we develop a trend, if you will. Brilliant point, KB, and that's a very subtle, mature research conclusion to make. And a poorly done experiment also may not help you demonstrate cause either. So this is the end of the Chapter 1 lecture. Don't forget that I'd love to see you in lab this week. Lab is at, I'd love to see you in lab this week. I'm going to leave the details off because lab may change from semester to semester. If I have to use this recorded video, I don't want to put that false information out there. Well, I don't have any more points to make to you. I hope to see you in lab, and I don't know. Take care, and until I see you next time, be good.
Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please consult your directory and call again, or ask your operator for assistance. This is a recording.